Hey, welcome again to another video, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that you guys can join us today. Today we're going to have a short conversation about, I decided to make a video about this. I've spoken about this. You may hear me talk about it a little bit every now and then. I may drop it here and there, but I wanted to make a video specifically about this topic so that it doesn't get missed, because it's really a very important point to make when you're looking at anything that has to do with history. And this is something that must be established when you're, regardless of what you're looking at, when it pertains to history. And it's these two things. One, when you hear people say prehistoric, all right, prehistoric. All right, that's one thing. And then the other one is civilization. All right, civilization, right? And these are words that oftentimes get thrown around, but I don't think that many people really understand what it means. And I would argue in this video that both of them are tied to, you hear us saying oftentimes, this thing, the Matrix, right? And the Matrix in of itself is basically it's history. Okay, his story, who's his. Okay, that's the whole question right there. So when you have history and prehistory, what does that denote? What that's basically saying is that history in of itself is basically a string of events and time stamps, that kind of thing. It's just this history in of itself, different events, just time in of itself within a specific time. Okay. And that is something that's to be understood. That's basically what history is. It's events. Like if I want to know the history of a camera, for example, right? If I want to know the history of a camera, I'm not going to go back to, Mesopotamia to get the history of of a camera, right? I'm going to go to back in whatever it was, the 1700s, 1800s, or whatever, when, these conversations first started happening. And then they started putting together just what is later became what we know today as the camera. And so I'm looking at the history, the time frame of this device, period. You understand what I'm saying? The technology of this device. So when you say history, that's what we're looking at, the time, the specified time of whatever it is that you're talking about. Okay. And so when we say history in general, we're looking at a specified time. Now, the next question you should ask is, who's doing the specifying? Okay. So that's the thing, because clearly they're doing this. They're saying this is history, and they'll give you a whole stack of books, right? This is history, right? But then they'll say, well, that is prehistory or prehistoric. Well, you've seen on the on the thumbnail there, when they look at, it's funny how everything that is prehistoric, it's always, they show like the cavemen or whatever, they all got, look like apes. Basically their hair is all disheveled, they got the cheekbones that are huge and the little eyes and wide mouth and all of that stuff. It's basically, that's what they're talking, who they're talking about. Okay. When they say that. So, and this is why I try not to even talk. Anytime when I'm reading something and the word prehistoric shows up, I just replace it with ancient, because again, anything that's historical, it's within a specified time. The next question, like I just said, you have to ask is, who's doing the specifying? So even when we're talking about biblical history, we're talking about history as it pertains to the writers of the Bible. You understand what I'm saying? So you're looking at a history. So you got history, right? But then you got biblical history. So it's like a lens looking through a lens. You know what I'm saying? When you talk about biblical history, and that's what we try to do here. We try to uncover that, and also uncovering that other thing too. Because when you look at history, when anytime history is mentioned, regardless of where you go, if it's in a book or a magazine or an article or whatever, they're always talking within the framework of what has been that is freely discussed, in the open marketplace of ideas. They're always talking within that framework, and that framework is always based, just about all the time, on is more Eurocentric. You understand? But it leaves out a very important thing. All right. And what I'm going to do first is let's just simply go to Google. Okay. I'll just show you what I'm talking about here. And hopefully this will make a little bit more sense of what I'm talking about. So what I did was I went to Google and I did this. All right. So let me pull this up here. All right, here we go. It's taking me just a moment here, because this is going to shoehorn us into our other thing, which is civilization. All right. So this is why, again, you got to pay very close attention to words that people say. All right. So I went to Google and I said, I'll just make it bigger for you. And I asked the question, where did mankind begin? All right. And it says here, humans first evolved in Africa, and much of the human evolution occurred on that continent. The fossils of early humans who lived between 6 and 2 million years ago come entirely from Africa. Most scientists currently recognize some 15 to 20 different species of early humans. So pay very close attention to that. This is coming from the Smithsonian, by the way. All right. So they're acknowledging that what we know as humans today, they're acknowledging that that what we know as humans today eventually all came from Africa, which, again, I have some theories on that one. But anyway, I'm saying for us as black folks, we can say that, yes, we come from this place, this continent, what we know today as the continent of Africa. Okay. And so, but notice how they portray the people who come out of this area. Okay. They say that much of the human evolution, which means that we didn't start off as humans. We started off as something else. Right. So we started off as something lower, and then we kind of sort of worked our way up. All right. Because they say the fossils of early humans who lived between 6 and 2 million years ago, all right, come entirely from Africa. Most scientists currently recognize some 15 to 20 different species. So your species, you see how they do that? And so, but notice they're also acknowledging between 6 and 2 million years ago. All right. Now, we did a video. We've done a couple of videos, and I think we even did a podcast, just talking about the early kingdoms in Africa, where it's a lot of intelligence there. You hear me talk about this a lot. Probably one of my favorite topics is what's called today the Adam's calendar, which is located in more like South Africa region. And these are stones that they discovered. They found that basically that, they're not just a bunch of rocks just thrown in a field. The way they're arranged in such a way where you have some of them that actually can pinpoint different stars all in the sky. And then also the way they're arranged in such a way where in some cases, they found that they reflect the sound patterns that are coming out of the earth at that point. Now, what they estimated is that the people who lived there go back as far as 70,000 years ago. That's a long time. In fact, it's older than Egypt. There's a lot of attention that's always put on Egypt. But when it comes to activity that was going on in Central and South Africa, well, that's prehistory. That's prehistory. We ain't going to talk too much about that. But anything after that, well, that's history. So do you understand now that, what you're living in is in fact a matrix? It's something that is built. You're living in a narrative, someone who built this narrative, this construct, where they're saying they're taking this super duper long timeline. We don't know how far it goes. And they're taking one little slice out of it and saying, we're going to call this piece history. All right. Because this piece is what we control. We're going to control the narrative. We're going to control who wins. We're going to control who loses. We're going to control everything within this piece. But anything else, we're not going to pay too much attention to that. But they really are, because anyway, I'll get into that in a moment. So this is what I want you to understand what history is. Okay. So now let's look at civilization. Now, what does civilization, what that basically means? Civilization basically means that it basically is referring to a point in time where mankind started getting it together, meaning that we started, our technologies start coming up. We start figuring out how to build different technologies. We began to start building, kingdoms and all of this other stuff. We were smart. We were smarter. That's basically, we were civilized. We understood how to eat. We understood how to clean ourselves, because in pre-civilization or prehistory, the people then, they didn't know how to do that. They would just look at rocks and be like, what do you do with rock? I take rock and knock on my head. Ow, it hurts. That's what they want to portray, what took place prior to what we're calling today history, right? And so they're saying that civilization is when man began to figure things out, and mankind began to get their stuff together. Okay. So let's take a look at, where did civilization begin? All right. So we're just going to do a Google search again. All right. Very simple. And I know this is extremely simple, but you can look, I'm doing it with Google. I'm just doing a quick Google search because anybody can do this. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and pull this up on the screen. Here we go. Now, Mesopotamia. So I asked the question, where did civilization start? All right. So and I'll just read it and I'll just add more there. Okay. It says civilizations first appeared in Mesopotamia. Keep that in mind, what is now Iraq, and later in Egypt. Civilizations thrived in the Indus Valley by around about 2500 BCE, in China by about 1500 BCE, in Central America, which is now Mexico, and about 1200 BCE. Civilizations ultimately developed on every continent except Antarctica. All right. Notice, once again, Africa is left out with the exception of Egypt. Now, why is that? Why do they put a special emphasis on Egypt? Because in this history timeline, in this chunk of history, what they're calling history, that is the part where Europeans had influence in Egypt. So the Europeans are pretty much saying, hey, listen, whatever we put our foot on, wherever we stamped our foot on, we're going to call that's civilization. Because we were able to ultimately conquer those parts of Africa. So we're going to call that civilization. Anything even from Egypt on north, going into the Mediterranean and then Mesopotamian area and all of that, we're going to refer to that as civilization, right? Because we civilized it. It was where civilized man lived. But anything south of that, or, going to the western part of Africa and the Nok, people, the NOK people, they were uncivilized, which we know that's a big lie. I mean, if you've done any reading on the Nok people, I mean, they were very advanced, right? Not including when you start going further south into the Kingdom of Congo and all of that stuff. There was a lot of advancements there. See, now, hopefully by now, you're beginning to understand why all of these different nations are holding on to so many artifacts they found all throughout Africa. Because the reason why they're holding on, and many of those artifacts are actually hiding. And the reason why you don't hide something that's not a threat to you. You understand what I'm saying? And that's exactly what I believe is happening, is that there's a ton of stuff that these different nations want to keep hold of and possession of, because it tells a more complete story of exactly what was going on all throughout the rest of Africa, the part they don't want to acknowledge. So, okay, so again, so you understand now what history is. History in itself, in and of itself, is a matrix. It's basically taking a part of this very long, again, we don't know how long it is, a very extremely long timeline, and they're taking a chunk of it and they're saying that this is his story or our story, and we're going to control everything within that. Okay, and that's what that is. Now, the other piece that we just explained, we talked about civilization. Within history, civilizations were established. Now, and where were those civilizations established? I just showed you on the screen, Mesopotamia area. Now, what else emerged out of Mesopotamian area? The Bible. All right. So when you look at the Bible, when you look at the historicity of the Bible, it's all referring to that area. You've seen many times on this platform, we even talked about how when was in the New Testament, you had Jesus saying, go into all the world and preach the gospel. When you track all the places where these disciples, now apostles, traveled, they all went into mostly the Mesopotamian area, with the exception of one that traveled to India. But everywhere else, no, it was all that area. So the Bible in of itself. So when you look at the Bible basically, it tells the history. Watch that word, of the origins of civilization. Okay, you following me? Okay, because when you look up, where did the Bible, or rather, where did the Garden of Eden originate? Well, again, now some of y'all who are watching this, you're automatically going to say, oh, it's in South Africa. Automatically jump, but wait, okay? So again, I'm going to go to Wikipedia. It's just one source, and they have a lot of links there, but this is just one source, and then we'll talk about Africa. Okay, we'll get to Africa. Okay, but they're pulling from various studies that have been around for a very long time within the archaeological circles and historians, and this has been the going thought for many years. So I'm just going to read this part here. Okay. All right, so so here we go. So they said the suggestions for the location of Eden include the head of the Persian Gulf, as argued by, and then they give the name Juris Zarins in southern Mesopotamia. There you go, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers run into the sea, and the Armenian highlands or Armenian National Plateau. And then they say British archaeologist David Roll locates it in Iran in the vicinity of Tabriz, but his suggestion has not been adopted by mainstream academia. All right. They said others theorize that Eden, it was merely a region of considerable size in Mesopotamia. What keeps coming up over and over again? Mesopotamia, where its native inhabitants still exist in cities such as Tel Assar, based on verses such as Isaiah 38:17, or that it encompassed the entire Fertile Crescent. And then they also mentioned Lebanon. They said it appears that the Lebanon is the alternative placement in Phoenician myth. Phoenicians, there's that word too. And then they give scriptures and all that stuff, right? And they name different parts all throughout this area. Okay. So when we read Genesis 1:1, when we read the book of Genesis and we read about the origin, how man was created and established and all of that stuff, right? What you're reading is an origin story. All these different religions have their own origin story, right? There's not just the Bible, but you have different religions out there that have their origin stories. And when it comes to the Bible, the origin story in the Bible is written and is based on what took place in Mesopotamian area, because all the activity that takes place within the Bible, it centers in that area. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when we read about Adam and Eve and how they were created and all that stuff there's no indication in that story about a gradual progression or a progression of man starting at a lower level and then all of a sudden he working his way up from ape to now all of a sudden he's this, highly intelligent being and all of that. No, it's not that. It just immediately starts, that man and woman were created. And then from there, that's when civilizations sprouted out of that. So that tells us again that this story, when it was written, what the original authors had in mind when they were writing that, because they considered Mesopotamia as the birthplace of civilization, is that when Adam and Eve were created, they were created in that region. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, as we fast forward in today's world, there are scientists that are suggesting otherwise. They're suggesting that the Garden of Eden is somewhere in central southern part of Africa. And for some of you, on this platform, we've even looked into it as well, that you have maps that also name some of these areas as the birth as the Garden of Eden. There's one strip of land in South Africa where they refer to it as the Garden of Eden. Now, is that true? Is it not? Well, here's the thing. It has to correlate with everything else that's mentioned that, around that. And there are some things there. But here's the thing. Now, some people may say, well, look, there's some maps. You got to look at the old maps, brother. You got to look at the old maps. And yes, we have done it extensively on this platform. And you'll find many maps that do have names of these different areas mentioned in the Bible. That's very true. However, this is what you have to keep in mind. There's two things. Number one, who did the maps? Who drew the maps, right? That's number one. It was Europeans. Number two, you have to consider the other thing. Europeans have a long history of just about any place they conquered or they considered they conquered. They would typically name it after biblical towns. For example, you have Bethlehem, PA in Pennsylvania. You have a town called Bethlehem. You have other towns throughout. They're not coming to mind right now, but I know all throughout Pennsylvania and in New York, in the state of New York, there are towns all across just this country alone that are named after biblical places. So why am I saying that? Because the logic has to match. If we're going to say that, for example, the Garden of Eden is in fact, in South Africa because this old map says it, that same logic has to apply to all the other areas that are named after all of these biblical towns outside of that region. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because why? Because the people who made these maps, it's one and the same. They're the same people. And this is the habit this is the track record that they have. Anywhere that they would conquer, they would name it after different biblical places. That was just something that they did. And maybe perhaps I will actually put together a list and put it on our community page of all the towns named throughout the, United States that are named after biblical towns. Okay. Because we can't, so are we going to conclude that those towns, Bethlehem, the real Bethlehem mentioned in the Bible is actually in Pennsylvania? No, we're not going to say that. You understand? So that has to correlate with that, so we can't just come to that conclusion on that. Let's see what else I have here. So we covered history, we covered civilization and where that come from and why it's important to keep these things in mind when you're looking at the Bible and when you're looking at history in of itself, period. Because again, the Bible itself, even though the writers, the people who put together the Bible, it wasn't just one person. You have a ton of people. And in Mesopotamia, when you start reading about the different religions that were all in that region, they had a long history. They call it syncretism. They had a very long history of taking in borrowing, or whatever you want to call it, from their different religions to create their own unique thing. When you look at Judaism, for example, Judaism is basically, you ever have, like, let's say, for example, for some of you who grew up in a household where you had a sibling that had Legos, and then they invite their other friends to come over who also, they're going to bring their Legos over too. And so what happens is that you got your Lego set, they got their Lego set, and then the other person, they got their Lego set. And then as you guys are building stuff, you're going to be missing a window, or you're missing some wheels or something like that. And then what are you going to do? You're going to ask your friend, hey, listen, can I borrow that? Can I borrow this? And the next thing you know, you guys are just borrowing stuff from each other, and then you're creating something that's unique to you. Do you understand? And the same thing for you for your ladies out there. If you grew up in a household where you played with Barbie dolls, or, dolls and stuff, and you had a whole wardrobe. Well, if your other friends would come, your friend girls would come around, you will want to borrow, and you guys will borrow clothes and stuff like that. Well, that's how religion, when we look at religion, it's the same exact thing. Same exact thing. There was a whole lot of borrowing and stuff that went on in the establishment of religion, especially the Bible. The Bible was not written in a vacuum somewhere where you had people cloistered together and they no influences at all. No, they were pulling from all different types of religions. Okay, and this is kind of things that we talk about in our research group. And so that's what you have to keep in mind. So the Bible, or the biblical story, is one that is centrally based in Mesopotamia, right? But it also embraces, beyond that, European thought. That's where it comes from. You will see some influences coming from different parts of Africa in there. You will see that, someone who's really somewhat astute in at least some African practices, you'll see some of that. Okay. But it does not make the Bible an African book. It doesn't make that, because you have to look at who are the people who actually wrote it in the first place. And it was not Africans. All right. These were different. These are people who originate from that region up there that we talked about. Again, Mesopotamia, Mediterranean area. And yes, they did borrow, because a lot of the Bible was written around or in Egypt. Egypt was a magnet for people all over the continent. So it does make sense that you will find some African influences, to certain degrees within the Bible, but it doesn't not make it a book that was written with Africans in mind. And like I said, the biggest example that I can give you is, again, look at the trajectory of the apostles when Jesus supposedly gave this commandment for them to go out into all the world. The world for them was Mesopotamia. It was not anywhere else. They didn't go to Hawaii. You know what I'm saying? They didn't go to the Americas. They didn't go anywhere else. They didn't go to New Zealand. They didn't go anywhere else. They went right. They stayed right in that area. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, I guess for bonus, another thing I wanted to touch on really quick. Art is another thing that's I really, especially the history of art, is really something that's really fascinating. It's always been fascinating to me. Let me pull this up here on the screen, and let's chat about this for just a moment. Okay. Now, what you're looking at is African art. Okay. This is just a quick view of African artwork. Now, a lot of times when you look at African artwork, you notice that in many cases, there's some exceptions there. Much of African artwork, when you're looking at ancient artwork, a lot of times it's very either exaggerated or it's um, somewhat like an animated look. You know, the eyes, for example, you see this. You can spend weeks just talking about the meanings behind the many, many different masks. All right. We're just taking our time now. Some of these, like I said, I'll get to these in a moment. The ones that look more like people, right? But a lot of when you look at African artwork, it's very, it looks somewhat animated, right? All right, so you get that, right? Okay, now let's take a look at European artwork. All right, so when you look at European artwork, you see that it tends to look more like people, right? Like people that you see every day for the most part. All right. This is just, like I said, this is a quick Google image search, but you get the idea. When you look at European sculptures, you look at paintings, like pencil drawings, that kind of stuff, they tend to look like people that you see today for the most part, right? Now, why is that? Now, this is something I actually shared with I think I shared with the research group, but I think I mentioned it on a podcast as well. Now, what's very interesting about this is that European artwork was basically something that was based on individualism. In other words, European art is something that it's like you looking in the mirror, right? So their perception of each other, their perception of the world was pretty much what they see, so I look in the mirror, I'm looking at you, I'm just going to draw exactly what I see. That's it. Right. And so it was individual. They were focused on, looking at the world for the most part, more like a one dimensional, right? What I see, it's like a camera. You take a picture of, a tree, that's what you're going to get. Right. If I take a picture of the people around me, that's pretty much what you want to get. Right. Now, Africa on the other side of that. Right. And it's not just Africa. There's other cultures, too. But we're just Africa has a lot of cultures, but there's other places, too. But we're sticking with Africa here. Africa, the people of Africa on the other extreme, you can start off with Egypt, which when you're looking at Egyptian artwork, you do have, a lot of paintings that look like people, like regular people. But you also have paintings that, they mix like the animal stuff, like Anubis and all these other gods and stuff like that. They'll have a head or upper body of an animal, and then the lower body, it looks like a human. You'll see that kind of stuff. But then as you start moving south within the continent, the artwork begins to change. It looks changed drastically. All right. And so what it is that the people of Africa tend to look at things more spiritually. All right. And, and so when they would do a figure or they'll do something like that, their perception of that person or that subject, it wasn't just, I'm just going to do something that looks just like you. I'm actually going to, what I'm putting together right now, it's a reflection of what I perceive spiritually. And so the people of Africa tend to be more on the spiritual side of things and how they put together their artwork. This is why when you look at masks and stuff like that, there's a meaning behind all those different things. The colors that they use, the eyes, sometimes the eyes are very narrow. Sometimes they're very wide. Sometimes the nose is small. Sometimes it's big and all of that stuff. They all have specific meanings and they vary from one culture to another within Africa. That's why I say Africa is a very, very deep place for real in many ways. So our perception of the world was more spiritual versus when you start going in the European space, there was more individual. They were more looking at, what I see, what I get. That's it. Okay. And so that's why these Europeans, they came in Africa. They was like, wait a minute, y'all doing stuff that we don't see the world that way. Tell us more, that kind of thing. And that's why they came all in places like Africa. And then you can say the same to a degree in India, to a degree. And then you'll see these same practices on how people were perceived spiritually, especially when you start going to the different islands and stuff like that in the Pacific Islands. You'll see that. To a certain extent, you'll see that going into the what we call today South America, those different ancient kingdoms down there. You'll see that a lot too. They tend to perceive people and different things more spiritually, and the artwork reflects that. Okay. So this is why it was so ridiculous to me when this nonsense story that just keeps coming up over and over again. Yeah, you have so many black folks that want to see themselves in European paintings and not see themselves in African artwork. Are you following what I'm saying here? Because that's what's the root of all of this stuff. This nonsense is like, you're just dancing with joy because you think that the Europeans are seeing you. But it's not the Europeans that are seeing you. It was the people of Africa that was really seeing who you really are, at least according to how they portrayed it in their artwork and things like that. So that's why through European eyes, when we look at African artwork versus European artwork, it's easy for people to look at African artwork and say, yeah, look at these prehistoric people. See, they didn't even have it right. They were so dumb and stupid. They didn't even know how to do a painting, or they didn't even know how to put together any kind of artwork that looked like real people. Everything looked like stickmen and Play-Doh and all of that stuff. But that's not true at all, because, getting back to this image here, you'll find ancient kingdoms African kingdoms knew exactly how to do artwork that looked like real people. Do you understand what I'm saying? That was never a problem for Africa. It never, ever was a problem for Africa when it came to that. But they were more centered on perceiving people, objects more through a spiritual lens, and not one that was simply based on individualism. You understand what I'm saying? So, so what I just shared with you. So this is how these things are played into the prehistoric space. The whole prehistoric argument. That artwork that I just showed you, that's prehistoric. And then the artwork that you see in Europe, well, that's historic. You understand what I'm saying? And then, or that was done in civilized times. This is the kind of artwork that you'll find in civilization. That artwork that you'll see coming out of Africa, well, that's prehistoric. That's the uncivilization. They weren't civil then. They didn't know what they were doing. So I just wanted to do this short video just, because this is something that's extremely important when you are actually taking the time to go through and study history, regardless of what the topic may be. But this is I believe is a really foundational thing that everyone must have, regardless of what your opinions are, is that when you say history, you're talking about you're talking about a very small piece of a much, much longer timeline. And this small piece that everyone's arguing and debating about, it doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't. When you start looking at these ancient kingdoms, like I said, these things go back 70,000, 80,000 years. Where's all the records on that stuff? And, some things are lost, due to time or whatever. Right. But there are plenty of things out there, and this is why you have to, if you're in pursuit of the truth, you really have to clear the deck and just kind of start from ground zero and just go with that. Because when you're standing on someone else's perception of this long timeline, there is a whole bunch that you're going to miss out on. And you're going to spend a lifetime trying to fit yourself in this very tiny, tiny, tiny space, that's actually minimizing who you really are. Okay, so I hope you got something out of this. Thank you so much for tuning in. You take care, and we'll be talking again soon.